Welcome to The Bold Blueprint, a podcast for modern educators who dare to think differently. Here we explore the intersection of education and leadership, diving into bold strategies, innovative teaching, and the mindset shifts that drive real impact. Whether you're in the classroom, leading a team, or shaping the future of education, this is your space to learn, grow, and lead with confidence. Another week, another podcast, another pretty exceptional special guest. How are you, Barbi?
I thought that was my intro for a second. No,
That's
I'm
your
very
intro.
good, and I agree the same. I did say off fair beforehand, it's like long time admirer, so very excited to get a chance to chat with Adrian today.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking with Adrian about a variety of things. A lot of the listeners may know Adrian through the Farran Street Education program. I know that I've heard about quite a bit of work, Adrian, that you've done, and we're really excited to be able to unpack, some things around leadership. And I guess there has been some common themes in leadership and early education, which I think is a fascinating space. I personally have dedicated my career in this space. And I remember when I very first started, no one really teaches you how to be a leader. And it even comes from the fact that children think of their teachers in classrooms as leaders. Then you go maybe through a room leader experience, and then all of a sudden you're making sure that classroom environment is being the best it possibly can be and having these conversations. But without further ado, Adrian, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And I'm excited to talk about, all things leadership.
That's so great. And I think something that we really triggered's probably the wrong word, sparked my curiosity is there are some training organizations across the country that, really specialize in the training aspect. But my understanding is that you actually walk the walk because you've got your own service, right?
That's right. Yep. So we've had it for 30 years now. In fact, we're celebrating our 30th birthday next year. So used to be my grandparents' house. So I have memories of going over there on weekends. My mum grew up there. So 30 years ago, we converted it. It's a double brick house in Lang Cove. And we're, I guess, one of the original 35 place childcare centres that still exists. So it's
Wow.
nice and calm and relaxed. I run the centre with my brother and my mum. In fact, I was there the other day and my mum was on the ground. She's 75 now, on the ground, crawling around in the preschool room with a whole lot of educators on their hands and knees. And she's looking at all the resources going, look, it's boring down here. It's boring. Come and have a look at it from down here. And all the educators, she couldn't get up. She's 75, but she got down on the ground and all the educators were following her around, and they were viewing the environments from a child's level. So, yeah, it's where I've grown up. So it's quite exciting that most of my teachings and most of my practice come from a base of my own service.
Yeah, wow. So a house that was converted into a centre. And so I'm imagining a Sydney brick house that are very common across Sydney and with a backyard, 35 places. Like, do you have like a kitchen? Tell us a little bit about the layout of that site.
Yeah, so we do have a kitchen and we've got Sabina there, our Italian chef, who's been with us for about 20 years, I think. All the parents love coming into the centre because they comment on the amazing food. They always wonder how Sabina gets them to eat fish meatballs when no one eats fish meatballs at home. And the kitchen's at the front of the house, and out the back is the huge 30-year-old Japanese maple that shades the sandpit and shades the play area. And then we've got our jacarandas. So a lot of the trees and a lot of the environment is like going to your grandparents' house. They've been there for a long time. So it really has got that homely feel. And I guess one of the differences is it's calm. When you walk into the centre, it's calm. You're greeted by Sabina at the front window. You walk down to the educator's room. There's no crying. There's no yelling. There's no screaming. There's no slamming of doors. There's no beeping of security tags. It's like walking into a family's home. And I think that really makes a difference. I think as research evolves around what children need, I think calm is probably one of the biggest indicators for good development. We know that's the home life especially, but I think if there is going to be early education, I think it needs to be calm.
especially with my mum hat on. I'm kind of the opposite, trying to get the kids out this morning. So I very much appreciate and value a service that you can turn up to, because sometimes we're not having that calm we might ideally want at home. So at least the children can have it in another space once they settle in their day. um,
Yeah.
yeah, make a world of difference.
So I think it's yeah, I agree. I think calm is important for anyone's mental health, and having a stimulated classroom. We've talked a lot about play-based research and neuroconnections of brains and the positive learning environment. But I guess what I'm curious about is, I guess what you're most famous for, Adrian, is Farran Street Education. When did Farran Street kind of start, and how did that journey go?
Well, yeah, Farran Street Education grew out of Farran Street Quality Childcare. So, about 15, 16 years ago, I was working for a law firm in learning and development, teaching lawyers. And then I was doing some workshops for the staff at Farran Street. And they're like, we really need this. Like, this is something that we don't have in our sector at the moment in terms of leadership training, communication, team workshop, and HR. So, then Farran Street Education was born, and we started to realize that there was a need for high quality professional development around leadership. And in fact, we're still one of the largest providers of specialist leadership and management training in the sector. And we stick pretty closely to our lane. We don't do anything around early childhood development. We stick pretty closely to leadership and management.
And I
I
know
def
everyone's kind of heard of you. Sorry, Jamie. I
oh,
think I've got a lag. I keep interrupting. You go.
no, 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 go for it, for
Oh, I
sure.
was just going to say, like Jamie said, he's heard of you. I've heard of you. There's someone else where I am at a co-work. They've had you in for training. It's like everyone's heard of Farran Street Education along in some ways, whether online or I see a lot of what you post, or in person, having an opportunity to get you in. Um, and I did notice, I thought I had seen you done adult education. So hearing where you started to then where you shifted, it's a
Yeah.
very, yeah, going from lawyers to educators.
Yeah, well, it's nice now. I've been in the sector 16 years, and I get room leaders coming to my leadership workshops, and they're like, now I know why my boss is so amazing, because she did your workshop 16 years ago, and she's an amazing leader, and I know why she's amazing now, and I can be an amazing room leader as well. So you start to create, cultural changes inside services, because I think strong leadership is so important. Because normally we just get promoted to leadership roles, right? We're like, oh, the leader left, you there, you're reliable, you're good at what you're good at educating children, you'll be the next leader.
Mm.
And we're kind of thrown in the deep end. And that's kind of horrendous. I don't think there's any other sector where we just throw people in without any training. So, I'd love to see people skilled first, upskilled, and then given the role. Like, could you imagine getting a hip operation and the surgeon's like, oh, I'm just learning on the job? Like, you'd be like, oh, I'm all good. Just hop off the table. You'd be like, I can walk. That is like, we throw leaders just into the deep end. And we're like, if you've got questions, come and see me. Just learn on the job. Learning on the job is almost synonymous for trial and error. Just learn through trial and error. And that's a really slow and ineffective way to learning. It's much better to teach people before they get into the role when a mentor's there. So I can encourage my centre managers to go and practice being a centre manager while the centre manager is still there. Go and practice being a centre manager for 2 weeks while your other centre manager is sitting in the office. If you've got any questions, go back and see them. But you be the centre manager while your support person is still there, rather than you testing out to see if you're a centre manager while they're in Capri. Oh, yeah, we'll put you in the role while they're in Capri and we'll just test you out. So I much prefer people to be trained before they get into the roles.
I see your point, and I think at the start of the podcast, let's break down what is leadership. Like, who is the leaders of an early childhood and outside of school hours service? What's your perspective on that, Adrian?
That's a very interesting question, strangely enough, because we used to want distributed leadership. So, distributed leadership means that there's an opportunity for leaders to lead all different parts of the service. That's distributed leadership. But the regulations give us positional leadership. There must be a nominated supervisor. There must be an approved provider. There must be a person in management control. So you had this conflict between distributed leadership, which we know is the best for high performing teams, and positional leadership, which is given to us by the laws and regulations. So last year in February, in their infinite wisdom, Sequent came up with this term collaborative leadership. Collaborative leadership, because they couldn't ask us to do distributed leadership because that's opposite to positional leadership. And positional leadership is ingrained in the regs. So they came up with this idea of collaborative leadership. And they didn't really define it. So it's been up to a lot of us consultants to kind of work out what they meant by collaborative leadership. But essentially, it's distributed leadership that sits within a positional leadership model. So you still are going to have your person of management control. You're still going to have your nominated supervisor and responsible person. But under that, you're going to try and have distributed leadership. And that is an opportunity for people to lead, many people to lead within the service. Unfortunately, collaborative leadership sounds like giving everyone a say. That's what collaborative leadership sounds like. So we've got some of these services now where we're like, oh, just let's sit around in a circle and take a vote. Let's use collaborative leadership. So that's not collaborative leadership. That's a disaster, giving everyone a vote. So distributed leadership or collaborative leadership would mean that you've got your squads, you've got your room leaders, you've got your nominated supervisors, you've got your person who does induction, you've got your outdoor sustainability team. Like, the service is full with a garden of leadership opportunities. That's really what collaborative leadership suggests, that before you become a room leader, you should be the OHS coordinator, you should be the squad leader, you should lead induction. And then after you've practiced for those 3 times, then you get promoted to a room leader. So that's really what collaborative leadership's all about. It's about, having many opportunities inside the service to lead not only functions, but people as well.
Yeah. Yes.
You go, Jamie.
Yeah, no worries. I see your perspective completely, and I think some of the moments that I'm thinking through is I too have been in the sector for a while and have gone through the National Quality Framework changes and reforms, and where I feel that we're about to be on the brink of something else, and the amount of different kind of services like yourself being a 35 place service to these 200 place services, and what does quality really look like, and having distributed leadership is a really is the model that I see as successful. I sometimes see with clashes when there's co-room leaders, or if there's no room leader model as well, and it's like, who's doing what, right? But I also think back in the way with the working towards qualification, when we think about, should people be able to be trained to be able to do X role, where I think the sector has a space where there's some gaps, where I know if you are in the teaching profession of primary school and high school, you've actually got to go to university, and then you do a prac, and then after years you do that. And to your example, being a knee surgeon, you usually go to medical school for a bit. You're usually under an internship. You're usually being directly monitored. It's very structured, and then eventually you get the keys there. And I'm curious about your responses about the state of play. Like, how do we fight against something that is so ingrained into what we do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there needs to be. Some recognition that there needs to be developmental pathways.
Yeah.
After you become an educator, you do some training. If you look at the formal training of the diploma or the ECT, the leadership models are very scant. I have people sitting in my 4-hour leadership workshop, and they're like, "Oh my God, I've learned more than I have in my ECT."
Yeah,
degree.
I've done a bachelor of primary teaching. There's nothing, obviously, primary teaching, but still nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
I'm working with other people.
Exactly right. And then the challenge is people try and do it, and they say, okay, well, maybe I should do qualify a diploma in leadership or something like that. But once again, that's not sector specific, so it becomes very difficult. So I think the sector really needs to step up and say, okay, well, let's have a look at the competencies that are required for a room leader. Let's look at the competencies that are required for an educational leader. Let's look at the competencies required for a nominated supervisor, and around the people management skills as well. That's really what's key. It's less around the technical skills, but around the people management skills. And then how do we set up the system to provide the skills to these people, to provide the training before we appoint them? If we appoint people first and then allow them to learn by trial and error, that's why we have such a huge amount of turnover. Job overload, role conflict, that all happens when you're not skilled at your role. And we know there are a couple of the factors for burnout.
So at Early Learning Management, we identified exactly what you're talking about, and we used the power of Moodle, and have been able to craft what we call learning pathways. And it's an ongoing evolution, because not all centres are the same, and how much hours can you give to people before they start the role and when they get promoted and all those things. But we've actually done exactly what you're talking about. And what we try and do is do micro learnings to
Yep.
make them be about 10-15 minutes, topical, question based answers at the end, so they can show the competency based learning, and then structure formalized coaching scenarios that occur. And what we find is, not just from a regulative space, but also to those soft skills, that people don't actually teach you how to have these skills. They just expect, all right, a parent's getting cranky, go and talk to them
Yeah.
about that. There's actually skills to be able to do conflict resolution with families, and
Yeah.
even being able to escalate grievances to somebody else. Like, this is all normal in everyday workplaces across many industries and sector types, but it's really fascinating when we're such a people-led organizations across the country, how little emphasis we put on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think it's really important people understand that it's learning, practice, feedback. Like, there has to be that practice segment, and then there has to be the feedback. It's got to be learning, practice, feedback. It can't just be learning, 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 learning. It's got to be learning, practice, feedback. And the number of people I say, "Oh, how did you teach your room leaders?" And they're like, "Oh, I just role modeled great leadership." And that's really ineffective. I went down to the Australian Open years ago and watched Roger Federer play, and he role modeled great tennis for 3 hours. He role modeled great tennis.
You're a pro tennis player.
I'm still a terrible tennis player. But he was there. So, and I asked people, and they're like, I role modeled, she didn't get it. She didn't learn. I'm like, wait, you can't learn by osmosis. You can't just sit on the textbook and expect to absorb the information. You actually have to practice, and then you have to give the feedback. So, but what's interesting to me is the dichotomy between what we know for children and what we do for our colleagues, because we're learning experts, right? We do that for children every day.
Mm-hmm.
Every day they're teaching children. 50 years ago, there was this big separation between early childhood education and adult education. And a few researchers tried to make a distinction to try and create an organized, a research area for themselves. I'm not sure they are two separate areas or schools of thought. I'm not that sure that they're that different.
Yeah, I know when I was doing my TNE, Cert for Training and Assessment, that is really hard, by the way. I realized as I was doing that, because I've done teaching, how similar it all felt. But again, obviously looking with the adult lens, and I was like, hang on, this feels so similar into what we do and how we do it, and especially that learning how to, I guess what you're talking about with my TNE, I did a 2-week intensive in-person thing with a whole other group of people learning. So I got to do that practice, that I wrote down the learning practice feedback loop over and over for the whole 2 weeks of how we might do different things with someone else before I went out, and then had to do that with other people. But yeah, sorry, sidetrack there on it's just so similar. And I guess on your adult education side, plus dealing with educators, plus being a approved provider, you must be seeing it like, hang on, they're not separate. Just
they're not separate at all. They have a lot of similarities. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm curious about, let's go back over years. I'm a less wrinkly, less grey-haired Jamie Morris, and I'm starting as a Certificate 3 trainee, and I have ambition to maybe one day be a room leader or an educational leader or a centre manager. What advice might you have for that person who might want to go down this idea of what leadership is, when you've got a bit of hindsight over the 30 years with the centre, and also with the reach that you have, Adrian? What kind of advice would you have for that person?
Yeah, so I think my advice has changed over the years. I think originally my advice would have been around learning the skills, learning how to give feedback, learning how to delegate, learning how to de-escalate conflict. I think that would have been my early advice, learning the skills. But I think what I've come to realize is it's really around the behaviors, being able to build relationships, being able to demonstrate empathy, being able to show well-being, being able to be predictable. They're the types of things that I think really make leadership. And then the skills can come second, because you can be great at delivering feedback, but if no one likes you, no one's going to be listening to your feedback.
Yeah.
And you can be great at telling people what to do, but if people don't feel that you're open and approachable, then people aren't coming to tell you what to do. So my advice has really changed over the years. I think it's less about the skills now, especially for junior staff, less about the skills and more about building relationships, how you can get on with people, how you can show predictability. In fact, predictability, I think, is a core leadership skill now. We know predictability is really important for building trust, being predictable, bringing a predictable energy. So if you're happy at work, it should look like you're happy. If you're sad at work, it should look like you're sad. But if you're happy one moment, and then you're biting someone's head off the next minute. If you're unpredictable at work, it really destroys trust. So I think being a predictable leader is really important. Having that predictable energy that you bring to work each and every day is really important. So I think for new staff, it's really around thinking, okay, what are the behaviors that I need to demonstrate? And the other one is solidarity. If my team make a decision, I need to demonstrate solidarity to my team. And that might mean that personally I don't agree, but I've had a go at disagreeing. And now I need to show solidarity to the decision that's been made. My leadership team were down the pub a couple of years ago discussing whether to do a reconciliation action plan or not. And one of the room leaders dissented. She didn't think it was a very good idea. So she argued against it. And eventually it was decided they would do a reconciliation action plan. And it was up to each of the room leaders to roll out. So she went back and she rolled out an amazing reconciliation action plan. Her team were motivated, they were engaged. And you know what? Still to this day, they don't know that she privately dissented in the leadership team because she showed solidarity to her leadership team. She supported her team. I was down in Canberra the other day and they had a whole day workshop on risk. And they discussed would they let children climb trees or not, and they agreed they'd let children climb certain trees. Come Monday, one educator said, "Well, I'm not supervising a tree because I didn't agree." And that
Oh,
really
I've had that.
and so just because you don't agree doesn't give you a ticket of leave, doesn't give you an excuse not to do the task. You still have to do the task. You might have to do it conflicted. You still have to do it. If you get a job at KFC, you have to fry the chicken. You don't get to stand in the corner and be like, oh, vegetarian. Like you still have to fry the chicken. You have to show solidarity to the decision that's been made. So I think predictability and solidarity are really key leadership behaviors.
I think I was predictable at being a walkover, because I was the one that would happily not let staff that weren't comfortable supervise or engage with the tree climbing. I'm scared of heights, so maybe it was my own bias going into that because I'm like, no chance of mine getting up there and putting that whatever we used to tie a thing to, so where the kids knew where to go and was checked. So I did used to let staff not do that type of thing, like your exact example there. So I guess, yeah, that's what my predictability was being a pushover on that. I feel like half my notes I'm taking for myself on the podcast.
It's therapy for me. It's okay.
Oh,
So I guess where do you see things go wrong? Like when you talk to services across the country and they come to you and they're like, "Gosh, we've got these problems," and you go in and you have a bit of an assessment. Where do you see, from a hindsight perspective, where people could have steered the ship in the right in a different direction?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is the lack of a leadership team. That's the biggest issue. Because if we look at where services have come from, they've come from your small 35 place service. And now lots of my clients are up in the 200, 250 place service, and they're using the same structure. They're using the same organizational structure. So having a poor organizational structure is probably the number one factor for failure. So when I set up any teams over 120 places, they're very different to what a 35 place centre might be. So if I'm looking at my 120 place model, you've got your nominated supervisor who's outward facing. So they look at things like occupancy, regulations, compliance, building relationships in the building relationships in this community. And then you've got your two community leaders, and your two community leaders are inward facing. So they're on 50% on the floor, and their job is solely to look after the room leaders who are underneath them. So each community leader gets 4 room leaders. Let's say it's a centre of 8 rooms. And the community leader's job is to be inward facing, manage the staff, manage the meetings, and do the mentoring and coaching, the on the floor coaching. And then you've got your room leaders, and your room leaders' job is to look after the educators. And the only people looking after the children are the educators. That's the only people looking after the children, because their sole job is to look after the children. Because if the room leaders look after the children, who's looking after the educators? So
Mm,
when I go into centres where they've got 120 places and they've got one nominated supervisor and 8 room leaders, and that one nominated supervisor has to manage 8 staff, I'm like, it's not possible. It ends up a crazy service where people are running around, slamming doors, screaming out instructions. It's just chaos. So I think a poor organisational structure and not having a strong, united, future-focused leadership team is where most services fail.
Yeah,
what
I completely see that. And I definitely think organized structure is really important and clearly defined roles. I know I bring myself back to what you're talking about when I lived in the States, and I did a lot of work with Gallup, which is a research organization looking at engagement in the workplace, emotional connection of what that looks like, and high performing teams. And the number one pillar was all about I know what's expected of me at work. And that if you don't have that foundational pillar, everything crumbles from there. So making sure really clearly defined roles and responsibilities, and making sure there's a good support structure, because that's the second pillar, which is I've got the support and resources to be able to do my job. So it's really interesting how you're thinking that through. So I like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about support. So I was talking to an educator, and she was saying, "I love when my nominated supervisor comes in and changes nappies.
Yeah.
She really supports me." And I said, "Well, actually, your nominated supervisor's job is recruitment. So what about if she stayed in the office and she did recruitment so well that you were never short-staffed, and when she recruited a new staff member, she never sent you a dud. She always sent you a high-performing educator. What would you prefer? Her changing nappies, or you never being short staffed and you're only getting high performers?" And the educator immediately said the latter.
Yeah.
So it's interesting what people perceive as
yeah.
support. Yeah.
I was going to say, so obviously that model to anyone listening that happens to be someone that doesn't have that type of structure, but in a smaller service, because obviously a smaller service, and this is good as yourself, you run a smaller service with your family. How can that model be viable in a smaller service, especially if someone's just heard, oh, the NS isn't kind of child facing, the room leader's not child facing, and then expects that? Again, I wanted to help with that perception for anyone listening, because we can have an ideal, but then also what we can afford
Yeah.
um, to keep the doors open as such.
Yeah, so when I say the room leader is not child facing, they still change nappies, they still educate and care for children, they still do everything an educator would do. But their primary focus is delegation, feedback, leadership, and goal setting. That's their primary focus. So that comes at the top of their responsibilities. So, yeah, they still act as an educator. So when we look at services, we want 3 levels. We want the thinker, that should be the nominated supervisor. They're the ones that do the strategic thinking, manage risk. Then we want our room leaders or our community leaders. They're the coordinators. They're the ones doing the delegating, the coaching, the guiding. And then you've got your doers, and your doers are your educators. They're the ones predominantly looking after children, caring, and educating. The issue happens is when your thinker becomes a doer,
Mm,
and they're changing nappies, mopping floors because they can't find anyone else. Imagine if I was a captain of a cruise ship and the engine breaks down, one of the 4 engines, and I say, "Oh, well, I'm the captain. I'll just go and fix the engine." Like, who's steering the ship? There's no one steering the ship. The 3 engines are still going. I need to call down to the engineer, get the engineer to fix the engine. I need to remain in my role as a thinker. Okay, so we need to make sure we keep our 3 levels. In our sector, for some reason, nominated supervisors love being doers. They love doing.
I agree with that, but I once again would challenge that, because I think that's a systemic issue across the sector. And the reason for that is the career journey is usually people were the doers. No one's really taught them how to, be the next level that you're talking about. And then they're so ambitious that they want to become the center manager, but they've never really gone through a leadership journey. They may not have had a mentor that's really talking about these ideas that you're talking about, which I'm so aligned with. And so I think we get a revolving door where you see a lot of center managers, 2ICs, and leaders, even room leaders, being really stretched thin, not really knowing how to fit everything within a typical working week, taking
mm.
work at home, working extensive hours, not having that work-life integration or balanced approach, and no one's really coached them around that. So
100%. Yeah.
I think I'm curious about what your thoughts are with that, because we do have such a systemic issue, especially in the RTO world, where it's mandated how to get a diploma and a Cert 3, and you get your bachelor's, whatever, but they're all real child centric focus. Like, how do we get out of this? I guess, Adrian, I'm curious about that.
I think it comes back to setting up the roles correctly. Like you said, there needs to be clearly defined roles and responsibilities. We need to teach people before they move into a room leader role what's the role of a room leader. I think we see a lot of people end up in the doer role because that's what they find the easiest, because
Yeah.
that's what they've been trained to do. And that's why they end up in the doer role. Some of the thinking aspects they haven't really been trained to do, and they find it really hard, and they've been set up to fail because they've been put in the role, but people haven't provided them with the education. So I think that's why we see a lot of people slipping back into the doer role. Even when you look at leadership teams, like my leadership team meet down the pub every 3 months and they discuss staff, which staff are working, which staff aren't working, what are our goals for the next 3 months, where do we want to take the centre to. And I go into other leadership teams and the whole leadership team meeting is around children and around parent complaints and things like that. Their focus is too much on the transactional every day. So I think if you can put systems in place, so for example, I have a very specific system that all the centres that I work with use. They have a 10 past 10 in the morning. So a 10 past 10 is your morning briefing, your morning stand up. The nominated supervisor briefs all the room leaders around what needs to be done and says, I trained you, I trust you, I've given you all the information you need. I don't need to see you for the rest of the day. I believe you can manage your teams. So they have the 10 past 10, which is transactional. But then they also have their 3 month leadership meeting, which is future focused. So I think having the right meetings in place allows people to put their mindset in the right place. A lot of people are not doing their 10 past 10s. They're not doing their morning briefing. And it leaves the nominated supervisor to be a doer because he or she's got to get the messages to everyone in the morning and at lunchtime and in the afternoon. If they did their 10 past 10 in the morning and they briefed their room leaders and they said, this is who's coming in, this is who's going on programming, prep, allergies, there are room leaders. You have all the information you need to manage, motivate, and engage your room. If you've got emergencies, I'll be here. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow at 10 past 10. That really promotes that transactional type of information sharing. And then that leaves the strategic meetings for the bigger picture things.
Are our expectations of leadership a bit skewed as an educator? So hearing how you are talking makes me, if I had my leadership hat on, feel so much better. In like, oh wow, okay, like permission to do this. Where I think a lot of us don't give ourselves that permission, like feel like we have to changing that nappy and doing all this, which is different to you come across the other people that are just like, no, I'm not doing that. Like that, I think that's a completely different thing. But I feel like there's whether it's just the role of the profession we're in, there's a lot more empathetic givers. We
Yep.
don't kind of step back to think about that systematic change for the team. Like you said, those meetings are, as you mentioned, we tend to talk about families or the children. I was like, oh my gosh, probably did that at every single team meeting at the last service I was at for 10 years. But I was just wondering have you noticed if there's especially a common theme of why we don't?
I think, that's what we used to be trained to do. We used to be trained to get on the floor and help. We're natural givers. We love being needed and we love helping, and that's what we're good at. That's how we got our roles in the first place. But there's lots of new research out showing that those people who give all the time are the ones first to burn out. If you've got an open door policy, I'll almost guarantee you're going to burn out. An open door policy has been shown, to lead to burnout, because you look at some of the new research from Adam Grant around the givers and takers, who wins in organizations. The people who give all the time, the open door policy people, they lose. That's pretty clear. The takers, the psychopath who take the time, take the energy, they come in at the middle. But the ones who win are the givers who give their time in chunks. Like, I'm going to give you an hour of my time at 11 o'clock on Wednesday. That's our uninterrupted time. I'm going to give you an hour of my time on Thursday at 2 o'clock. That's our uninterrupted time. At 10 past 10, I'll give you my 10 minutes. I'm always here for emergencies, but I'm giving you time. And then at the other time, I'm going to do my job. I'm going to rest and recharge and do what needs to be done. So without a doubt, if people have got an open door policy, if people are like, come and see me for anything, uh, that's the system that's leading to burnout.
I agree so wholeheartedly. If you were to look at my calendar,
Yeah.
and this is the advice that I give every person I talk to, especially center managers and operation managers and different teams, my calendar is my Bible, and I time block everything. I also leave time in my calendar for free time,
Yeah,
so making sure that there's time to check calendars. I actually put at 7:30 every morning a 10-minute reminder to do 10 minutes of meditation. And for me, that really works. And at the end of the day, I've got a bookend of things that I need to do. But I think sometimes what I do see is let's just make it up as we go. And that becomes quite a reactive space, and people aren't putting things in their head. And I think I would be recommending for listeners to, even for room leaders in rooms, is to think about your week and think about your week in time blocks. Because you would typically find that there will be predictable patterns of work that occur across a week. When is your programming time? When that typically would occur? What happens in that rest time period if the children are actually resting? What does it look like when lunch breaks are occurring? And how does that rhythm of the day look? Because typically we do think about that for children. We're thinking about for children, okay, morning teas at this time, our group times at that time, and outdoor plays at this time. But we don't actually look inwardly and go, well, how does that affect my week and my work that I need to do? And how do we make sure we've got that really good structure, but also giving 20 to 30% of time throughout the week where you need to have spontaneity. You need to have things that will come at any moment. You can't structure everything like an Excel spreadsheet with a formula for everything in our space. But I agree, time is precious. It's one of the commodities we can't get back, and we
Hmm.
should be treating it as a commodity that will never come back. We should. It's precious.
100%. Yeah. And so we run time management workshops for nominated supervisors. And, Jamie, one of the big points is planning out your day, but leaving time for reactive tasks.
Yeah.
Like if you know that you're going to get interrupted, 4 hours on a Monday because it's a busy day, then only plan the other 4 hours and leave 4 hours for reactive tasks. In fact, one of the group of centres I work with, the room leaders now do a morning intention. A morning intention is 10 minutes where they get all their educators and they talk about what's going to happen during the day. Just to set the scene for the day. So they've got their 10 past 10 with their nominated supervisor, and they go back to their room and they do their morning intention. And once again, it just makes everything calm. I think calm is so important. There was that research maybe 20 years ago out of Princeton University where they got these trainee priests, and they told the trainee priests that they were going to have to walk across a square and make a presentation to a group of students. And in the square, they planted an actor who was sick and was coughing and clearly needed assistance. And they wanted to see if the trainee priests would stop to render assistance. So they told some of the trainee priests, "You're running late. Quickly get across the square." They told the other lot that you've got time, you can relax. And they told the third lot that you're running on time. And they wanted to see which group of trainee priests, as they were walking past this man who clearly needed help, would stop. Interestingly enough, the ones that were told they had heaps of time, they stopped and rendered assistance. The ones that were told that they were running on time, 50% of them stopped. And the ones who were told they were running late walked straight past the man who needed assistance. And I think it's an interesting story because it shows when we're stressed, we don't do what we believe to be right. We don't do what needs to be done. We start to compromise our values. And I think that's why having your calendar and planning out your schedule allows you to do the important things. And I think that leads to compliance as well. If we run a stress center that's reactive, we're not going to be hitting our compliance targets that we need to do, our mandatory reporting and things like that. Whereas if we've got our scheduled meetings, like the priests who had time to render assistance, we're going to be acting in line with our true values.
I think these are really great practical tips that I'm hearing. And I think one of the things that I am hearing a lot through, which is interesting, is actually a lot of communication and how
Mm.
important it is in leadership to have effective communication processes that, to your point, is predictable. You're talking about rigor around 10 past 10s and, the ritual of going back into classrooms and, even an induction program with mentors and buddies, like that's predictable. Um, so what's resonating a lot with me is about really focusing on communication in leadership, right?
100%. So it's interesting. Belonging is a big factor for children. Like, obviously, our quality framework's all around belonging. And AERO, the Australian Educational Research Organisation, did some research around what are the evidence based things that build belonging. And they found that rituals with children build belonging. So if you have a morning ritual or a lunchtime ritual, and it's the same thing with educators. If you have communication rituals with your educators, not only is it going to build communication, but it's also going to build that sense of belonging. Now, sense of belonging has been shown to increase retention by over 50%. Like, that's massive. If you look at educators who have turnover in services and those who have low turnover, the difference is those educators who feel like they belong. So if you can have communication rituals or even new starter rituals are a great way to make educators feel like they belong. I know Google has a new starter ritual. They call it Nooglers, where they wear a little turbine hat and everyone comes and greets them on their first week. In fact, all my centres, they do a new starter ritual on day one. You fill in an all about me form, and it's got your history and your background and your family. And it's also got a section about the foods you love. And then on day 5, we have a welcome morning tea. And guess what food arrives at the welcome morning tea? All the food you listed down on day 1 on your All About Me form. The chef makes all your favorite food. You know, that's the quickest way to make people feel like they belong and help educators be retained. So, yeah, to your point, I think communication rituals, but any rituals that build a sense of belonging are going to really lead your centre in the right direction.
What are your thoughts, Barbie? How
Yeah,
this has been really good practical tips, hey?
oh, still the whole time I'm like, I am still that pushover leader. That's terrible. I wish I had Adrian come in 20 years ago. Not you weren't doing it then, but just like hypothetical. Because I know for me, I am that very, and especially with our background, Jamie, I tend to be. And I know you are too. You are a giver. I know you said your calendar's booked out, but I can see you probably still let things.
No,
Um,
intentionally though, because I do
yeah,
think as a leader, you do need to have availability because if the other person needs, so I leave time for that. Like for
yeah.
example, every Friday from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, I've got one-on-one time that's an open block that everyone knows. So people know they can book in that time if they need. But I also throughout the day have periods of time for a couple of hours and everyone can see my calendar. So
Mm.
I can see, hey, Jamie's got a meeting right now, can't interrupt him. Hey, he's free then, and tap on in, and I'm like, cool. It allows me to really feel on top of things. And you're right, but I do think in leadership, most leaders are givers at some point. I don't think, unless it's a dictatorship, um, like leadership is about the whole and the team in my mind. And in a room leader context, it is about the children in the little people in our spaces, right? But I do think it's a fascinating topic to say, how are we looking inwardly to think about how we're showing up in the very best way? How are we looking about what is our day looking like? Are we just going with the flow and figuring it out as we go, which a lot of people do? But how are we actually stopping and pausing? And I actually would like to do a call out to the listeners who are listening, and a reflective question that I'd like to everyone to think about is, how was your day today? Were you feeling on top of your day? Were you feeling rushed? Were you feeling like, wow, that took me by surprise? How is your week looking? Like, how's your year been? Like, really start thinking about this when you start looking at, at this point of the podcast, or at, middle of November, looking towards 2026. What lessons could you take away? Because what I think sometimes, Adrian and Barbie, that I see is that people, not just leaders, but people forget how much autonomy and power they actually have in their decision making. It's quite often when I go see services where they're blaming everybody else. They're blaming the cook because the food's not out on time. They're blaming the fact that there's all these behaviors. They're blaming the fact that the center manager is, whatever. The center manager's blaming everyone because no one's been trained in doing the right thing. The classroom environments, everything's messy. But I sometimes have to remind people about, well, what are you doing about it? Like, look inwardly, you know,
Yeah.
and think about what is in your control to be able to make this difference. And I think what we're really good in early education is reflective practice, and reflective
Yeah.
practice sometimes is in the kitchen or in the staff room with doors closed, talking about the problems but not actually doing anything about it, which then causes toxicity. And I think we've got to harness that superpower, which is about educators finding problems but doing something about it. And actually sometimes it starts with us actually demonstrating that ourselves, and I believe that's a core foundation of leadership.
100%. I think one of the responsibilities we have in leadership is to make sure our staff are competent. I don't think a lot of leaders realize how much stress we're placing on people when they don't feel competent. You know,
Mm.
some of the services I work with, one particular service, they have cooking day. And I said, "Oh, what's cooking day?" And they said, "Oh, well, once a month, one of our junior educators are nominated to go in the kitchen and we have and cook." And they said we have high absenteeism on cooking day. People always seem to be away. We put up signs, we put up notices, we remind people, but we don't know what's going on. People are always away on cooking day. I said, "Oh, what? So they have to make sandwiches?" And they're like, "No, lasagna." And I'm like, wait, so you take one of your junior educators, once a month, you allocate them to go in the kitchen. They have to cook lasagna for 90 children in a kitchen they've never seen before to be judged by a jury of their peers. I said, I'd be away as well. Like, there's no way I'm turning up to put myself through that much stress. And I think as leaders, we need to recognize if our staff aren't competent, if we set them up to do things that they don't feel competent in doing, and that can be things like, you know, dealing with parent issues. Like if the mum says, no matter what happens, don't take the child's jumper off. You know, they need to have their jumper on all day and it's 40 degrees outside, and then the child whips their jumper off themselves, then the room leader's faced with a conflict. If we as leaders and managers are not arming our room leaders to deal with that conflict, we're allowing them to exhibit a lot of stress. Like that's really anxiety inducing. So I think as leaders, it's really important that we make sure that we're not allocating tasks that our staff aren't competent in doing.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. The example, like you said, how so was it that example of them being away on that cooking day? Was it like a light bulb? Like, had they never actually noticed there was a correlation between them being away and the cooking day? Because
They
sometimes
knew
it's
people
such a
were away.
perception.
They knew people were away on cooking day, but they kept telling me it's because they're lazy.
I know. I
It's because
think
they're
cooking's
lazy.
easier than looking after children. Pending
Cooking
lasagna,
beside
though.
cooking lasagna in a kitchen you've never seen before.
Yeah,
No, thank you. But I
yeah,
don't think people realize a stress response to being
yeah,
incompetent is avoidance. You know,
yeah.
that's what they're doing. They're avoiding the task. What does that look like? That looks like not turning up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this has been great. I mean, there's been so many great practical tips, and I'm just looking at the time now, and I just want to thank you so much for this important conversation that I think needs to continue to. We need to talk about it. We need to all have a voice. I look at the Facebook and look at all these anonymous posts, and
Mm.
state and federal and local governments are trying to understand what to do about all this, and I still think there's no clarity. And we can't change the RTO system, and but I do think what you're talking about is some real practical tips that services can do within their control. And we're so thankful for your time.
Oh, it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
I do have a question I end on that has nothing to do with what we've been talking about, and I always deliver this in the worst way. No, we've just evolved as we've recorded. So, do you remember what the first live performance you went to? Whether it was so Jamie and I started with live music, bands,
Oh.
but then not everyone goes to bands. So we're like live music. It could have been theatre. It could have been movies, and I can't think of it. There's been so many different examples we've had of everyone just and
Your
their
live something.
first.
When was the
Yeah.
first time you went to a live something?
No, well, it would be live music. It'd be Splendor in the Grass, I
Oh.
Okay.
think. Splendor in the Grass. And I don't remember that many. Maybe I shouldn't say this. I don't remember that much of it. But I do remember I had drink tickets left over when I was about to leave. And I said
Yes.
to my friend, give the drink tickets to someone who's going to appreciate it. And he turned around and he gave it to the girl, and she was talking on a banana. And I said, "Oh, I'm not sure she knows what you've just given her. Like, you've just given her $100 worth of drink tickets." She just went off talking on her banana, and I'm like, that's my live music experience.
Live music, Australian music festival season's always a highlight, and I think it's a dying art, and I think a lot of us have really good memories of going to a festival or two over the years. Thank you so much for being here today, and for all the listeners, we hope that you have taken something from this. This is a podcast for you, created by educators as well, getting these awesome guest speakers, and I can't wait till we have our next guest speaker on. And drop us in the comments, like, what were some things that you took from this? Let us know something that you might have put into practice as well. We'd love to hear, be brave, be bold, give something a change. If you feel that there's something that you could see as change, like, give it a go. It all starts by small little incremental changes. And we just thank you all very much for listening today, and goodbye. And thank you so much, Barbi. Until next time. Thanks for listening to The Bold Blueprint.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach out to us on
elm.net.au or
fireflyhr.com.au.
Bye.
Bye.